Pick up a white card, focus on housing, voting, the mayoral race, and Airbnb. I want to start off by asking you, anybody who wants to take this. So I read the business section regularly to learn more about what's really happening in San Francisco. And as most of you know, when a lot of these companies go public, they create millionaires overnight. Like 140 millionaires were created after Twitter went public. And again, a lot of people from overseas, it's mostly China, Canada, the UK, there's 4 main countries. We did a show about this recently. And they're buying these $1.5 million one-bedrooms, and then they're empty. So there's so much money being flooded. One friend said at one of the top floors of these high-rises, they were going to have 10 units, but because the demand is so high with people with so much money, they're going to have 2 units. The one facing the city is going to be 10 million, the one facing the ocean will be, or the bay will be 20 million. So we're talking about a lot of money. And I just wonder, maybe Tim, you could start off because you've been following politics so much. What are the main differences between what we are seeing and facing today versus the dot-com bubble in the 90s?
This is the dot-com bubble on a lot of steroids. It's the same kind of pattern, but it's way, way more dramatic. Now, the other thing you remember about the dot-com bubble is during the dot-com era, you had things like Pets.com. They raised all this money to sell 50 pounds of dog food through the mail, right? And anybody with any sense realized that wasn't going to work, and it didn't. And a lot of these things just kind of raised and flopped, all right? What we're seeing now is much more sustainable. The money that's coming into San Francisco is not Pets.com money. It's not going to crash tomorrow. It's companies that are actually making things and that are continuing to, and then it's all this international investment capital that's pouring into the city. Housing decisions in San Francisco are not being made by what housing needs we have. They're being made by where international speculative investment capital wants to go. And right now, that is building $20 million apartment. That's where the highest return is. I mean, you don't need a degree in economics to understand this. Money goes where the return is highest. And in the 80s and 90s, when all of us on the left were accused of being NIMBYs and not wanting housing, we were begging for housing. We were begging developers to build housing. But no, the highest return was in high-rise office buildings. So that's where the money went. Now it's in very high-end luxury housing. But the thing to remember about this is that no one in San Francisco, no developer, has a God-given right to build whatever they want in San Francisco. We don't have to approve that luxury housing. We can say to the developers, no, we don't want any more of this. That's okay. That's our right as a city. Okay? But right now, I don't see an imminent crash. I see this influx of investment capital and an influx of very wealthy people, and also somewhat wealthy people who are richer than most of us, moving here from someplace else to take high-tech jobs. And I don't see that ending anytime soon, unless left to its own, left to the invisible hand of Adam Smith and the market, it's not going to change. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. The only thing that's going to change it is by the city actually using its powers as a municipality to plan, to zone, and to decide what we want and don't.
So given that we know what the problems are, what could Ed Lee realistically do to tackle this issue, specifically when it comes to affordable housing? Because according to SF Public Press, by the year 2022, San Francisco needs to build more than 16,000 new affordable units just to keep up with demand.
Let me just speak to that really quickly, then I'll give it over to Tommi. All right, is that okay? Go back to the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. All right? First, do no harm. First, don't give Twitter a tax break and have them bring in all of these extra high-tech workers. Don't decide that we're going to do everything we can to attract tech firms when there's no place for their workers to live. All right? Second, growth should pay for growth. All right? It's really simple. If you are going to build a headquarters for Salesforce in San Francisco, and that is going to attract 10,000 new employees, you should have to pay for housing for 10,000 people. And if you can't do that, if it doesn't pencil out, then go build your Salesforce headquarters in Detroit. There's nothing wrong with saying that. Right? So those are the 2 things. Don't make things worse, and make sure that the people who are making money off of these projects are paying for the impacts they create. We have city studies that show that every unit of market rate housing create, every 100 units of market rate housing create a demand for probably 40 or 50 units of affordable housing just by the market rate housing. That doesn't even include the demand that Twitter's putting on it. That's just the housing itself creates that demand. So tell them, if you want to build market rate housing in San Francisco, fine. You can build 25 units of affordable market rate housing and 75 units of affordable housing, or you can go away because that market rate housing isn't helping us anyway, right? So, Tommi knows more about this than I do. That's just my rant.
I agree. I agree with what Tim just said. I would add something that's going to sound really crazy at first, but think about this. I actually challenged Ron Conway at a meeting. I happened to be at a meeting in City Hall where the mayor called all these housing people together and tried to have this kumbaya moment where, you know, he got bankers and realtors and radical housing activists like myself, and Ron Conway did this just unlikely crew of people in one room. It's a wonder we didn't wind up killing each other. But at the end, and Ron Conway got up and did this whole grandstanding about, I feel for you folks. It's horrible what's happening to the city because of the tech industry. We don't mean for this to happen. We're feeling your pain, and blah, blah, blah. So I went up to him afterwards, and I said, you don't know me, but if you really mean what you said about wanting to help, here's what you can do. So he's like, I said, you can call your buddies in the tech industry, raise $1 billion, which I know you can do in a few days, donate it to the community land trust, earmark it for rent-controlled buildings when they go up for sale, so that the land trust has a competitive edge to get those buildings, because right now it doesn't have a competitive edge, because the speculators come in and they can outbid the land trust every day. So I said, give the land trust a competitive edge. The land trust can probably buy about 900 4-unit rent-controlled buildings, and in that way we make an impact on the housing crisis by keeping people in their homes. Because that's the other thing that nobody really talks about in this housing crisis, is that basically we need to be protecting people and keeping their homes and stopping the evictions. And the best way to stop the evictions is the land trust buys the building, the tenants form a co-op, they have permanently affordable housing for the rest of their lives.
And for the rest of time.
Right, and for the rest of the time. It's permanently affordable. It's not like tax credit units, which run out in 30 years, and then the tenants get a rent increase up to market, you know, or some other form, or even BMRs, where it can be taken away from you, the affordability. So Conway kind of just looked at me and said, that's interesting. And then he turned to the guy sitting next to him, who turned out to be Jeremy Wallenberg, who's his aide, and who basically runs SF City, which is their big charity organization. And he said, I want you to keep in touch with Jeremy, because it's kind of an interesting idea. I want you to have some conversations with him. So the Land Trust and myself have been having conversations with him. We tried to get money from him for Marty's place, which he didn't come through with, even though he promised us. But we're in conversation, and I'm not giving up on this idea. $1 billion is nothing for the tech industry. They are honestly the only ones who have the kind of money we need to buy back some of the land, to really make an impact, and to save a hell of a lot of people and allow them to continue living here. And it's not unrealistic, I think, for the mayor to go to his buddies and say, $1 billion this year and $1 billion next year. That's what I want.
What is the status of the land trust today in terms of how much
It's
money does it have?
It doesn't have the competitive edge.
Repeat the question.
Well, I just wanted to know what the status of the land trust is today. How much money does it have? How much power does it have? I mean, can people get involved? I think a lot of people are just now learning about how it works.
Community Land Trust is a nonprofit entity that buys the land and leases it to the co-op for 99 years. The tenants form this co-op, a nonprofit. Tenants make all the decisions. They decide how much the rents are going to be raised, if they're going to be raised. They decide how they're going to get the money to fix the roof. The land trust is there to help them, support them, teach them the skills they need to, but they basically manage and are self-sufficient, and the place stays off the market, cannot be speculated on. It's affordable housing that's permanent. If you want to read about land trust, the best thing to do is go to Google. Google in Dudley Street Land Trust. It's a place in Boston, a neighborhood, working class African-American neighborhood that took control of its neighborhood and basically brought themselves out of poverty and became a middle-class neighborhood by using land trust and the power of eminent domain they got from city council. Read about it. I don't want to go into it.
What was the name of it?
It's the Dudley, D-U-D-L-E-Y, Dudley Street Land Trust, Boston.
And just to make it clear with land trust, in the rules of land control, the land belongs to us.
Right.
you can buy a building, and that's your building, and you're going to do whatever you're going to do it, but the land belongs to the people of San Francisco. So Ed Lee actually has the power with the board to say, okay, speculators, you can play with this 2-3% of do your speculating thing, and we will control the land and the control based on what a healthy San Francisco looks like. We have that power, and Ed Lee has that power to do that.
And if they wanted to, they could take the mission and land trust the whole mission if they wanted to, or the Castro, or Bayview. They could land trust it. There's no reason we can't do it.
One thing that I want to add to that is I was living in a house over at Fulton and Lyon, and there were 9 of us that were living there, low income. We've been contributing to the value, contributing to the value of the neighborhood for years and years and years, and the sale was going to go on. They originally bought the building for something around $500,000, and they ended up selling it for $2 million. I called up Tracy, parent of the executive director of the land trust, and I said, you know, this Mother Teresa was actually in that building because it was a hospice for people with HIV and AIDS before the group of people that I knew moved into it. And so I said, this is the most amazing space. Let's go ahead and have the land trust help us. And guess what? It costs about $500,000 to build a new unit. If we had 9 people that were living upstairs and 3 downstairs and it was $2 million, that's actually a pretty good deal if you think about it. And it's a loan because we're going to be paying it off as a mortgage over the years. But the thing is that the mayor's office at that point wasn't allowing the community, it was the mayor's office of housing, and their small sites acquisition was going off of this HUD idea that, oh, well, because you share a kitchen, we can't count it as affordable housing in this way, and so they weren't giving us the money to be able to do it. We were on the short list, but we didn't get it. The other thing is that Ed Lee tomorrow could say, you know what I want to get on the next ballot is first right of refusal like they have in Washington, D.C. And if we had had that, I live in Fear right now. I live with 7 other people in an amazing co-op across from USF, and at any moment it could be sold or they could actually raise the rent because it's not rent controlled. We had first right of refusal. That would give me just one little bit of hope that we could actually keep that. I want to also counter this idea, and we could talk about it more, but this idea that there aren't a lot of companies here that are just, they call them fat unicorns, you know, like they're getting invested in, but they're not really coming back with any kind of real product, or, you know, it's kind of debatable as to whether or not they'll exist. Twitter doesn't really make a revenue. So when we're talking about 5 jobs created for every 1 tech job, and we have this 100,000 jobs that I read about in the Chronicle have been added since 2010, and like Tim is saying and Tommi is saying, they didn't build the housing for that. There's no plan. And so I really tie it back to Chase Bank and the collapse. And what happened in 2008 was we stopped building housing because of the collapse. And all of this stuff stopped, and only the city was building affordable housing. And what's going to happen now? They built all the luxury housing, and when's our next collapse going to happen? And then they're going to stop all the rest of the development. And so we really need to come up with different investment strategies. And Eric Marr is working on the pied-à-terre. He was trying to do the tax or do something around that, and I don't know where that stands right now. But we really need to, if Francisco or I are in the office, you're in the office, and we're going to come up with the ideas that we need and the creativity to be able to figure out how do we stop what you're talking about from happening.
And I'll be at your door every day.
That's right. No, and that's a requirement. Just because you have a Ferrari that runs 150 miles an hour doesn't mean you could run it at 3 p.m. down Valencia Street at 150 miles an hour. There ain't no free lunch. This whole delusion about it's my right to do whatever the hell I want with my money, it's not true. It's not true, and we have to change that political delusionary thought that is happening, unfortunately, among many of our 20 and 30-year-olds. That just because you have a bunch of money, you could use it and step over people who built this city.
We have a question about the housing bond. What is the status of this bond? It's the $310 million bond.
It's on the ballot. It will be on the ballot. It's going to be, we will be voting on that.
And so this is $80 million for public housing, $150 million for low-income housing, and $80 million for middle-income housing.
Yes, that's the shape of it. It will be on the ballot. You know, sure. I mean, why not? Let's have a housing bond. The thing that got me about this is the mayor says we're going to put on a housing bond that will not raise taxes. That's this whole thing. We can only do $310 million because that's the bonds we paid off last year, so we won't raise any property taxes. Well, excuse me, if you own property in San Francisco right now, if you own a piece of property in San Francisco, unless you bought it 7 minutes ago, your property taxes are below what they should be. That's because of Prop 13. And I say this as somebody who's a homeowner in San Francisco. My property taxes are a fraction, a tiny fraction of what they ought to be. All right, I bought my house 16 years ago. It is, the property taxes are way too low, right? So why can't we have a housing bond that raises taxes a little bit? 20 bucks a month on like all the people who own property in San Francisco. Why is that such a radical idea? Why do we have to have housing bond? Why don't we say, you know, property owners in San Francisco, more or less, by and large, are wealthier than everyone else. They should pay a little more taxes. Anyway, that's my beef with the housing bond.
Do you think there should be any rules for people who are buying housing and not living in the house or the condo?
Yeah, and it's really hard to do. Because how do you tell?
Yeah.
How do you tell? This is the problem with Airbnb.
How do you tell? How do you know who's living in?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, how do you know? I found out, I mean, the work I've done is I go around to these buildings and I wait until somebody goes in and I follow them in. And then I go ring doorbells. And then eventually the security guard comes and tells me I have to leave, and I politely thank them and say I'm just a reporter trying to do some work, but I'll happily leave, and then I go to the next building.
That reminds me, I actually worked for the census when I was at SF State in 2010, getting my master's degree, and I was almost scared at how relentless these census workers were, because there were a lot of people that were out of work, and so these were really intelligent people that were doing this work. And it was through that census work that we discovered that there were actual tens of thousands of unrented units. And I bet it's different now because we have had the housing crunch and crisis that we have. But that's, you know, even Ed Lee mentioned that in question time like a few months ago, where he said, we have these vacant units, what do we do about them? That's a great question, and I'm not sure yet, but we should be putting effort into that.
You could tax vacant units. You could have them, but then you'd have to have a staff of housing inspectors walking around to all these buildings, and you know, you can do some of it by looking at the tax bill and seeing if the tax bill goes to someplace other than the primary home, but then the person in Hong Kong may be renting it to somebody. So you really have to go and knock on doors, and it would be time intensive, but it's a fine idea.
We have a question about rent control. What else can be done about rent control? So currently, 72% of the 237,000 rental units are covered by rent control. Single-family homes, condos, and units built after 1979 are not covered, and there have been a lot of stories about rents doubling. I mean, you probably read about all of this. Maybe this has happened to some of you. So what would you do about rent control, and what could Ed Lee realistically do about rent control?
Well, we are tied by Costa-Hawkins at the state level, and so it really does take a statewide political revolution in order for this to happen. We're talking about reforms for corporations for Prop 13, but Costa-Hawkins limits us in regard to that. So, you know, one of the things that I do think about in terms of a pilot program is when I think about what affordable rent is, I do think that it is, you know, like the federal government says, it's 30% of income, and I think for, you know, a lot of people it should be 30% of net income. But I do like this idea of thinking about, you know, I'm not afraid to do thought exercises about rent control and say, this is working, don't tamper with it right now, but is there a possibility of doing a pilot project of, can we think about how this could be more equitable without getting some knee-jerk reaction to it? Because I've been a renter, you know, ever since I moved out of my parents' house. I am all for rent control, but maybe there is a way to do it more equitably. And I really want to look at and see what Richmond has got rent control, thanks to some of our allies, right? And so it'd be interesting to see if do you know if there's any differences between their version and ours?
I haven't read their version, but the problem that we have here is that the state, Berkeley, Santa Monica, and West Hollywood used to have real rent control, where the rent control stayed when the apartment became vacant. All right, you rent an apartment out for $1,000 a month, that's the rent, plus a cost escalator forever. All right, even if a tenant moves out. The landlords went absolutely crazy. They sued Berkeley. They took it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. They lost. All right? And then, having lost in the United States Supreme Court, they went to the state legislature, and they tried to make the state legislature say cities can't do that anymore. And they lost year after year after year because there was one guy who was the the president of the state senate, who wouldn't let it happen on his watch because he represented West Hollywood. When he was termed out, they came right in and they overturned it. So now you can't have rent controls on vacant apartments, right? The state has limited our ability to do rent control. So there are some inherent unfairnesses to it. And that's because in the state legislature, even most of the Democrats are from Central Valley cities where rent control isn't really an issue. And we've just had a horrible time. So I'm hoping, that means we just have to be really, really creative about what we can do in San Francisco. And a lot of what we've been talking about, the anti-speculation tax, for example, was like, given the awful state laws that screw us up as a city, what can we actually get away with? So tell me, what do you think we can get away with in additional rent control?
Well, I think one of the things that on Monday there's going to be a hearing about what are they calling it now? Eviction expansion.
Eviction controls.
Eviction controls 1.0. So it's a package of reforms of our just cause laws to try to stop some of the tactics that landlords, particularly speculators, are using to get people out of their apartments, such as breach of lease. I mean, there was actually a speculator who bought a place in Chinatown and was evicting the tenants because they were hanging clothes on a clothesline that they'd been doing for years and years and years and years with the old landlord. But he was calling that a breach of lease, a violation of their lease. And there's all kinds of silly things like that they're doing, but they're managing to succeed in a lot of cases because people don't know their rights, people are scared. If they're immigrant, they're scared out of their minds because they're afraid that immigration is going to be called. And I hear that all the time in my office because I speak Spanish. I have Spanish immigrants saying to me, it was, my building was sold, this realtor came to the door and said, if I don't leave by the end of the month, they're going to call the migra, they're going to call immigration on me. And even if people, and first of all, they make the assumption that just because you have a Spanish last name and you speak Spanish, you're automatically undocumented, which is a horrible, the racism of that assumption. But then on top of it, the fact is people are scared, whether they're documented or not, they're scared. And they don't want to fight the system. And I assure them that they can fight and that they don't have to leave and blah, 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 but people are scared. So we're seeing all these kinds of evictions, phony owner move-in evictions, that when you see the notice, when it comes into my office, it's like you look and you go, oh, no way. No way is this going to fly. But again, people are scared to fight. When they do fight, people are winning against these phony notices. So what we have is a package of bills that Jay Kim has introduced just to kind of clean up some of that and close some of those loopholes so that landlords can't get away. Speculators, I can't say landlords, they're not landlords, they're speculators, so that they can't get away with some of these tactics.
One other thing we can do, that the mayor started to do a little bit, but just a little bit, is, in San Francisco, anywhere in the United States, if you're charged with a crime and you don't have any money, you're guaranteed a lawyer. We could say that in San Francisco, if you're facing an eviction, you're guaranteed a lawyer, right? And what would it cost? $20 million a year to fund enough of anti-eviction lawyers that every poor person who gets an eviction knows? It's not that expensive.
They already overwork the ones that we have.
They are.
Yeah,
they are. But that's what I'm saying. If we had $20, $30 million a year more to hire,
we could hire more.
We could hire a lot more. And honestly, like reporters, anti-eviction lawyers are not that expensive. I mean, there's people, it's true. I mean, I'm on the board of legal assistance to the elderly. It's horrible. But we pay our lawyers like $50,000 or $60,000. This is not a $20 million thing. This is not like high-end thing. We could do it with a little bit of money. And in fact, they were talking about that. And you know what happened? It got to the budget committee, and Mark Farrah, the chair of the budget committee, said, no, I'm not going to put any more money into this. You know why? Because all of you housing groups come down to City Hall with 1,000 people and bother me.
Yeah.
Literally.
That's exactly what he said.
That's literally what he said. So I'm not going to fund you. But with a little bit of money, a fraction of what we spend on the cops and the fire department and all this other stuff, a little bit of money, we could fully fund a program where everybody who faces an eviction has a lawyer assigned to them. And that would stop a lot of them.
So now we know we gotta get Farrah out. The other thing is, once again, planning together. San Francisco, we have a lobbyist in Sacramento, and we have representatives in Sacramento that we have to be clear about. As mayor, that's what we would be doing, saying, lobbyists, this is your job. We got to get rid of this rent control blockage that is not letting us operate as a healthy city. Mark Leno, et cetera, you guys, you have a job that you have to do. If they don't do it, we have to work to get them out and do it and get people who do that job. Planning, vision, focus, and execution. You all know this is the process. I think another piece that goes with rent control, by the way, on the issue of this rent control piece, a small example of community education and passing the word. The Archdiocese of San Francisco put out, through their concerns office, put out a little leaflet saying, if you're getting evicted, call this number. 606 London Street in Excelsior, a woman three families living in one house getting evicted, 3 of them handicapped, and they're getting, again, another of these phonies, probably an illegal eviction happening. Well, they got the sheet of paper, they called the diocese, they got the thing going, and now they're fighting the eviction. They would have been out last week. They're fighting it, surviving. But another piece is affordability. We, like Tim was saying, we tax the big companies. They can actually become heroes. Throw them Google buses out of the neighborhood, tax them, fund in a good way muni. We all get to, I won't say free muni because we already paid for it, but a zero muni, or as they say, free muni, we all benefit as working people. But what you got going right now is a double class within the working class, right? You get these super little IT buses for the chosen folks who've been brought in from other places, and the rest of us get not that much bad of a muni, but the rest of us get muni. They could actually tax these companies, and we could all have a great muni.